there's a lot going on within the sector. I'll jump right into it if you don't mind. So kind of over the agenda here, it kind of flows with what you're going to hear throughout the day. So a little bit of a Canadian government update. I'm sure Christina will go over what's going on in the Hill. Got to touch on our American counterparts down in the South. I want to spend a lot more time on kind of the investment environment and what's happening here. Quick sector update, and then just some things to keep your eyes on as food processors. So I presented this slide about a year ago, and we had a Liberal government, a campaign promise, et cetera. They're doing a good job in terms of trying to protect a lot of things within the ag sector, a lot of marketing to help with diversification of different markets that us as Alberta food processors are trying to get into. That being said, there are two key things when we talk about some of the things we went through in terms of access to capital that were campaign promises that did not happen. The first is the domestic processing fund. It was supposed to be up to about $200 million. That has not made budget for 2025, which is unfortunate. And more for the growers, the Canadian Agricultural Loans Act, that's a program that ATB has looked at and sponsored. Right now, there were supposed to be increases to the program maximums and minimums. Unfortunately, that has also not made budget as well. So even though there's some good things happening from a marketing and diversification piece for trade, we still do need the capital piece, and as I think everyone in the room, it's no secret here that access to capital is one of the key areas that we need to address here going into the sector. Just a quick update from China. I mean, we do not have a lowering of tariffs on canola seed, canola oil, et cetera. I would just advise overall that if we're looking into new markets into China, just be very wary of this. A lot of things with trade can happen and change with China overnight. A big one in terms of interprovincial trade. An MOU was signed about November 2025 across all of the provinces to, reduce red tape, reduce trade barriers and everything like that. So when you hear that on the news, that sounds really good. Again, that being said, food and beverage has been excluded. There are different provincial regulations across every single province, and that's causing trade barriers, which essentially allows us tariffing ourselves between provincial to provincial, which ends up being about 7% really. So we need to make sure that when you're looking to have opportunities, going through the right challenges, right opportunities, and that's why we had something like Scale put into place to help navigate what we go through here. So the United States, really what's happening in the US is, I would say the strength of the consumer down there is very strong. Despite all the inflationary things, Donald Trump, you could name 100 things in the world of what's happening here. The American consumer continues to spend. They continue to buy different things. They continue to have great purchasing power. A lot of that is because a little bit more of the tax credits from the Big Beautiful Bill, a lot of the AI boom. You're still seeing investment come through the United States, and then the dollar continues to be the dominant currency. This year, I believe, and going into early 2027, that's something to keep your eyes on and how fast and how sustainable their spending is going to be. Just from our foreign exchange desk here, the long and short, we're going to see probably maybe 1 or 2 rate hikes maybe next year. That might lift Canadian dollar, so we're about $1.38, $1.37 is probably what we're looking to finish. Last year we were about $1.40, so we're still seeing some elevation here, but that could change just in the second half of the first half of 2027, just depending on what the central banks end up doing. This is probably the slide I'm going to spend the most time on. I know some of you in the room, Scott, we've talked about this. This is the same RBC report, but I just want to dive into this in terms of when we talk about access to capital. So if you look at that dark blue piece that's kind of in the middle, and I just want to point you to 2021, 2022, that is essentially a lot of equity growth capital that we see that is required to help scale up a lot of ag and food processors across the country. As you've noticed, 21, 22, 2021 was COVID. We saw a huge boon and everyone in the world's like, oh my goodness, I think food's very important. I mean, yes, we all eat, so thank you for that. But as we've gone through 22 and 23, you start to see a big diminishing, and then into 2023, you don't really see anything. And as I kind of go through the presentation, the numbers, you'll see why that's so critical. That growth capital has evaporated, essentially. A lot of projects, a lot of different scaling opportunities. I'm sure my partners at FCC and BDC, we've had this conversation multiple times as, well, How do we continue to grow some of these things? Well, that's kind of your answer on why we're seeing a lot of stalling of projects. What I will note is when we do see an evaporation of that growth capital, what you'll see is the light blue one, which is debt, which is on top, and you're seeing a lot more debt being put into the market today, a lot. And sometimes when we have too much debt on opportunities when we're looking to take that next phasing of scale, that step for scaling, that makes it challenging for financial institutions to really understand how do we continue to support without over-levering the companies. And that's really what the story is, and that'll explain a little bit of the food processing sales that we see in Alberta a little bit later on. I think that sells itself right now. Like, we got a lot of things early in venture stage to prove your concept, to prove your idea, but when it comes to that scaling, we just have a huge cliff that drops off here, and there's only so much financial debt can take on to try to bridge that gap without essentially overriding it and making sure it could cause a collapse. So when we look at overall, when we need to look at capital expenditures, we are seeing a flattening across capital expenditures. So when we see between those 23, 24, 25 numbers, we see some very depressed numbers in terms of capital expenditures to sales ratios for food processors across the country, and that aligns with what we're seeing for a lot of that growth capital disappearing. There's only so much debt can handle without the other half of the capital stack coming to fruition here. And what that kind of entails is if we're seeing a slowdown of growth capital, we're seeing a little bit higher leverage, you're seeing that Canada's behind all of its peers. When we look at, growth stage investments, opportunities to grow this sector, we talk a lot about opportunity and excitement, but when we see all these combinations, we are falling behind across all of our peers. And all of those peers are not excluding the United States. Right? That's all of the Netherlands, Australia, Germany. They all have better opportunity for growth capital right now as of today. I think everyone's aware of what's happening in the Middle East. The long and short, really what's happening here is on the farm gate, we are going to see compressed margins. We are seeing increases between fuel, fertilizers. It's already, a lot of decisions are being made across North America on the farm. So if you do source a lot of whether it's grains, oil seeds, et cetera, I would be checking in to see what availability is going to be there for any of these key crops or key ingredients moving forward, because there are harder decisions being made across the farm here. Clients are making decisions on what they want to plant, what has less fertilizer. That's already been taking into account here, not only in the US, but also here across our book as well. So we pulled a little bit of the data in terms of just food ingredient manufacturing across Alberta. So on average, we do about $2 billion a year. 50% of that, 55% of that comes from the animal protein sector of it, right? So about 2.06 to be exact. We see a 14-year trend. Typically, what we do see is those summer months, Q2, parts of Q3 are probably our busiest times of year. This year we had a little bit of a slowdown, and around March, springtime, that's probably some of our lowest sales. That's just due to tariffs and everything that's happening overall. So the slide that we had previously about the growth capital vacating. So if you look at this slide here, the blue is kind of was our projection from about 2012 all the way to about going into 2027. You average about a 6-7% growth target here. We should be at a higher number, but those 3 years, if you notice a flattening of the line, that is one of a couple things that are coming into effect. Number one, we've talked about capital. Number two, just I think disruption within our biggest trade relationship. And then number three is the consumer. The consumer has a lot of stress on them, and it's really putting a big weight in terms of how we're getting stuff done. We might see an increase from a sales perspective in terms of the numbers, but in terms of velocities, those things have started to slow down, and we are seeing a flattening across all of Alberta in terms of food manufacturing sales. Bright spots for us is in the greenhouse sector. We continue to see increased volumes to the US and to the Japanese markets. We continue to see a lot of growth here. We do see some increases in a lot of the costs here, so that's something to keep our eyes on. But across all of ag and food processing, we are seeing margins start to tighten just with increases. But there is a good opportunity with the government of Alberta launching the Greenhouse Grow program to help drive growth within this sector. And what you're seeing every year, there's more acres under glass for Alberta. British Columbia obviously has a lot of legacy area under glass, and Quebec has had a lot of government support. But when we look at Alberta, Alberta is one of those bright spots as an opportunity for us from a greenhouse grower perspective. So things that are emerging, diversification. I think for some of our customers at ATB, we've seen a lot of opportunities to go to other new markets in the Asia Pacific region, into Europe. I don't know if you remind me, Joe, was it for one customer we visited it was cheaper to send stuff to Australia than to Toronto? Is that right? Yeah. So it's some of those things. We look at interprovincial trade barriers. We look at different things that are hindering like domestic food sales. It's easier for us to go to markets as far as Australia than it is like a couple blocks over provincially. I found this very interesting. In terms of flavors, there's more complex and bolder flavors, a mix of sweet and spicy. I really like that. I was like, well, I'm going to put this in today. But a lot of the consumers looking for a little bit of that mix here. And then protein and fiber continue to drive food demand, specifically in the Asian Pacific market. We're seeing a resurgence in whole animal proteins, and then a shift from plant-based food demand overall, right? And then just really enhanced products with more of a protein side of it. Rise of automation and AI has been very critical. I mean, rise of automation for more efficiencies within manufacturing, but AI influence on eating habits has been really interesting, which I found that a lot of the consumers, when they go home, they're just asking AI, hey, I have all this in the fridge, what can I make? So looking to see what those trends are super important. You will hear this, I think, throughout the day, but the consumer is probably the number one piece that we need to keep our eyes on. On the far right, you'll see consumer spending at a growth rate of 1.6%. Most of that is probably inflationary more than anything. The real thing is how much per capita is disposable income across Canada. And that is flat, which means the limitations of choices for the consumer is at an all-time high, which makes some issues. It leads to the consumer being at an all-time low for us here in Canada. And the final thing that's probably on our plate is July 1st, which is CUSMA. The long and short here is there are really three options. We renew the thing for another 16 years. The U.S. wants to rip everything up, and we only have a two-way agreement between us and Canada only. You cut out Mexico. Or you have the third option where we'll wait and see. We'll continue to renew this thing year over year. We're unsure of kind of where that's going to go, but I would say July 1st is a very big day for everyone across the country to understand what happens with the United States. So I guess the final thing is why we're all here and why, things like scale and everyone else connected in the room is if we don't put our combined knowledges together and whatnot, we're going to see a lot of storylines like this. We see a flattening in sales, we see a flattening in growth capital, we see a little bit higher leverage overall, and we're going to hit a breaking point. But that's why we're here today. I mean, it's a bit of a sobering reality. However, right, there is still a lot of opportunity, a lot of reasons for excitement, but if it's not now, it's never.